All right. Thank you for joining us today for our second Auto Care Advocacy Leadership Team webinar of 2016. So our call 2 weeks ago, for those of you who could make it, I covered the wide range of issues we're most closely following the Auto Care Association. Like I said, for those of you who turned in, I hope it was informative. I realized that it was a lot of information, and not all of it applies to every one of us. But we also say that while it's important to be proactive about cultivating relationships with your legislators, it's equally important that you understand the key issues and for our industry and how they'll affect your business. And some of you, I'm sure, have specific anecdotes related to facing these issues in your day-to-day lives, professionally or personally, whatever. And when you combine those stories with kind of the broader impact metrics and the overall policy positions that we at the association can offer, you make yourself come across as a very powerful advocate. So please keep tuning in to kind of hear about the issues, updates on those issues, and hopefully you'll be able to kind of use that knowledge at future meetings with legislators. Now, in terms of what we'll be discussing today, I brought back Adam Mellis, Director of Grassroots Consulting for Aristotle International, to talk about reaching out to your legislators in an election year, which is a bit different than reaching out to them in an off year like last year, 2015. So I'm sure most of you know this already, but U.S. representatives run for re-election every 2 years, senators every 6 years. A lot of senators are up for re-election this year in 2016, especially those who won in the 2010 Republican wave. And the election is November of this year. And it's also, like I said, not just any other election. It's as you may be aware, a presidential election year, which means beginning very soon, much of the work happening in D.C. will essentially kind of cease, and everyone will kind of turn on, all-out campaign mode. So that means that more time spent in the district, meeting with constituents, attending fundraisers, holding town halls, a lot of opportunities for you all to find time to get in front of your legislators, or even, a member of their legislative staff who might be more available and are oftentimes, just important to get to know as the actual legislator. I guess before I go any further and steal all of Adam's talking points, I'll turn it over to him. But real quick, don't forget to write in questions in the bottom right of your screen. There's a question box there, and we will get to those at the end. So with that, Adam, take it away.
Great, thanks, David. I was a little worried there that you were going to do the whole presentation, but it's great to be with you all again. So I'm going to touch on election year outreach opportunities and really touch on some of the differences that you'll find. I'm actually well-versed in more on the campaign side. My background was working on a campaign for a member of Congress. I've actually never worked in the actual Hill office. So I have a few anecdotes that I'll share at the end, but it certainly is important to get an understanding of the difference between what the priorities are during a campaign versus what the normal operating business might be when the campaign isn't happening. The other thing I'll sort of touch on is that there are some differences in the calendar, if you will, in an election year. However, a lot of these elections, especially if it's for the U.S. House, some of these differences are going to happen in both the on and the off year, but I will touch on that when we get to it. So I'll talk a little bit about running for office and how candidates can sort of look at their connections when running for office. Talk about some of the ways you can connect, things you can do before the election and things you should do after the election, and really sort of identify opportunities where you can get this the organization's message across. I think it's important to really sort of, as David mentioned, the previous call was on the issues, and I was going to try to actually listen in on that call. Unfortunately, I had a little issue with my own family, but needless to say, everybody is well. But what I wanted to say is it's good to make sure that you're well-versed in the issues, because what you can do when you're well-versed is when you have these informal opportunities, you'll be able to share not only what the issues are, but also what your business is doing and how those issues react to your business. I mean, that's what these candidates for office want to be able to do. They want to be able to point to you as a business leader, as a supporter, as somebody who can really sort of help show that, you know, they're another person in the district. So just keep that in mind as well. So there are two different types of offices. When you become a member of the U.S. Congress, you end up becoming the president of not only one but two small businesses. There's the better-known small business, which is the official office. It's fancy. It has nice furniture. It's funded by the taxpayers. It certainly is a place where the business of the Congress as well as constituent services are to be provided. Then there is the campaign office. It is typically dirtier, a lot of empty pizza boxes, mix-match furniture. It's funded by campaign contributions, and a lot of that money really needs to go to other things than furniture. It is also busy, and it also shuts down for certain parts of the year. And I'll touch on that in a minute as well. But they really are two different places of business, even though it has the same boss. And whereas the priorities of both employee sets are to keep their boss in office or get their boss elected to office, the process of achieving those goals are very different. One of them is focus on making sure their boss does their job, make sure that they provide quality constituent services, help constituents navigate the government, and represent the people of their district. The other one is to reach out to communities, get endorsements, identify campaign supporters, and raise money and spend that money on advertising, mailings, signs, and of course raising more money. So they are very different, and one is very political, and one is very political in a different sense, and I'll touch on that as well. So I mentioned the Congressional Office, and this is something that I believe I showed in an earlier presentation for you all, but the Congressional Office is led by the member of Congress, and typically there is a chief of staff in Washington, D.C., and a chief of staff or district director in the district office. They both run their various teams. One has a legislative team. One has more of a constituent services team. And for a House member, it's you have a very limited number of employees for both the offices. I want to say it's about 18, but my math could be off. But it really focuses on how can the member of Congress represent the people of the district. It does not deal with electoral politics. This is a government office. They do not make statements about electing their boss. They don't make statements about keeping their boss in office. They do their job, and if they feel they do their job right, the people will reward them with another term. It's not the place to talk about campaign contributions or fundraising or your political opponent. And so, for example, the communications team for this office, they'll talk to the paper about the legislation that the member of Congress is doing, but they won't talk to the paper about an event or in reaction to something that their opponent has said. So it is a little bit different. Whereas the campaign office is a little bit flatter. You have the member of Congress, you have their campaign manager, which is basically the person who keeps the, everything running. They're basically the chief operating officer of the organization. And I put in bold the finance director, and this is because typically the finance director has become a year-round employee for many members of Congress, including ones who have tough re-election or are in leadership. And so sometimes they're sort of the deputy campaign manager. Sometimes they're just sort of off there in limbo. where the campaign manager sort of makes sure the rest of the operation runs. And it's somebody who, you know, my experience has always been when working with associations, the people who I worked with who were key contacts, a lot of them really did know that finance director because they were getting a lot of phone calls from that finance director. So keep that in mind. If you're constantly getting phone calls from somebody who doesn't work in the office, it's probably the finance director. That's their job to raise the money to keep this operation going. You also have a communications person, coincidentally sometimes, and a scheduler. Sometimes the communications person and the scheduler person are government employees who are on vacation, meaning that they have the job in the official office as well as this office. It is allowed under certain parts of the law, but you know, they will typically carry around 2 cell phones and make sure that when they do a campaign-related phone call, they're not doing it inside a government building. And so you may be on the phone with a scheduler, and they may say, you know what, can I call you right back? This sounds like it's campaign-related. Wait 5 minutes, you'll get a phone call from a different phone number. It's the scheduler wanting to talk to you about something campaign-related. Grassroots and outreach coordinators, these are the people who get out the vote. They target walk lists and precincts and make sure that the cars pick up the senior citizens, take them to the polls. Number of other things that will be done by that position. And the volunteer coordinator is exactly that. They are often also the office manager. They make sure that whenever there's a volunteer who comes in to help the campaign, whether it's working a phone bank or staffing a fundraiser or walking in a parade or distributing yard signs, they're the schedule for that as well. And it's somebody, if you're, you know, ultimately, you know, if you do end up, working on a campaign or helping a candidate out, it's a good person to know. And then you have various consultants who basically spend all the money that was raised for the candidate. So basic rules, and I've touched on a few of these. The logistical process for scheduling meetings with a campaign is essentially the same. I always recommend that unless you're doing something related to fundraising for a candidate, or you think, start with the government office first. The other sort of part of it is the the official scheduler has said, they are your point of contact on these cases. And basically I already touched on, don't be surprised it's the same person. Just, recognize they're calling you with a different phone number and be conscious of that. So the calendar for an election year is, it has a definitive deadline, and that is Election Day, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. And it is something where, you can't be late. You got to get your voters to the poll. You have to make your case. And very much there's no extended deadlines or omnibus bills that keep the government running while the negotiations continue to happen. It's an election. The election happens. You either win or you lose. And so it is a fairly different mentality. Having worked on the campaign side, we were very much about deadlines. It wasn't to say my colleagues who worked on the government weren't about deadlines. They were just a little bit more flexible on them. So just keep that in mind. But typically a normal schedule for a member of Congress is they have votes, they do committee work, they will do district work periods, they'll do town halls, they'll do office hours, some will do office hours at grocery stores, and it's very, very systematic, making sure that constituencies are visited with, making sure that various municipal leaders are just are checked in on, make sure that the needs of the districts is being fulfilled, making sure that federal agencies are doing their work, a variety of things. The campaign is a little bit different. they care about making sure that there are fundraisers to raise money to keep the campaign running. They care about parades. One of my experiences working on a campaign, the last campaign I worked on, we were constantly having trouble finding people to give out candy to little kids in parades. You know, we needed at least 10 people for every parade, and being I didn't have kids, I'd never really attended many parades after becoming an adult, and it was surprising to see how many individuals came out there for various parades throughout the year in different communities. There are other campaign-related events. Typically, it would be a meet and greet to get to know a new constituency. It could be walking precincts. You can sort of go down the list on anything. It basically is an event with the intent of communicating the message that you want to elect a candidate. There are going to be political party functions. As I hope you all know, we're in the middle of the primary season. I live in Virginia, so my mailbox is, I can tell you already right now, is full with about 10 pieces of literature. I've gotten 5 phone calls in the last 2 days. It's been very entertaining. But there are primaries and caucuses and party conventions, and there will be the larger party conventions. These are all things that really affect the schedule of a candidate, of a campaign. And so, for example, the Congress is going to go out of session during the 2 political party conventions later this summer, when the nominees of the respective major parties will be identified. It doesn't mean that your congressman is going to be home. It means that your congressman's probably at their respective political party convention, you know, doing duties for their political party. And a lot of them are super delegates or have delegate votes and duties. So it's part of the calendar you sort of have to think about. And then the primary election and the general election. And both of them have significant importance, but even if there is the candidate is running unopposed in the primary election, they still have individuals that they care about down ballot. There's still things that they can do fundraising-wise and building up support to prepare for the general election. Again, it's another sort of deadline that is respected. And then running for office. Typically, campaigns for U.S. Congress in contested districts, not including outside money, but just what the candidate will raise and spend, is upwards to $2 million to $3 million in a contested district. And so often what it means is these candidates who are running for office have to set aside time every day to raise money. They have to set aside time to attend fundraisers. They have to set aside time to attend, you know, coffee meetings where PAC checks are given, things that are not considered official business. And as the election gets closer, there will be more of the unofficial meetings versus the official meetings because of how they're, you know, these the priorities of the office fluctuate. In addition to the challenge of raising money, because I don't want to focus too much on that, is the challenge of getting individuals to volunteer for the campaign. You can walk into, let's just throw out, you know, a candidate for president. You can walk into their state headquarters. Chances are there's, you know, a number of volunteers who are focused on different, you know, get out the vote operations, different, you know, calling constituents, you name it. As you move down ballot, the number of volunteers dwindles significantly, to the point where I worked in a state and had an at-large member of the U.S. House of Representatives. It had 2 U.S. senators. One of the senators was up for re-election. That was the highest office on the ticket. And the senator typically had 10 volunteers in their office on a given day. Meantime, our lovely little House of Representatives member, who was running in the same geographic territory and had to run every 2 years instead of 6, we were lucky if we had 5 volunteers come into our office for the week. So it is something to sort of keep in mind that candidates really do value that volunteer manpower that is provided during an election year, and touch on some opportunities that may arise. But it can lead to some very informal conversations about, you know, what you care about with the candidate and their key staff directly. So as I mentioned, challenges with money and volunteers. Another challenge is the issues, making sure that you are able to define your own message, especially in a soundbite world where, you know, you may have made a vote that, you know, isn't popular because of something that you didn't even know you voted on. I'm not saying the system's right, but I am saying that's sort of how it works. And oftentimes what will happen is you may be making a vote because of a greater need in the district, but getting that information out there and telling your own story as a candidate is a challenge. Message, making sure that you stay on message and your people and your volunteers and everybody stays on message, getting positive press, and also just getting people to the polls. It is a challenge just to get people to vote sometimes. And so often as you get these campaigns get closer to election day, their need for people to help get their voters to the polls and people they've identified to be a supporter to get to the poll to vote becomes a greater priority. So some ways to connect. So as the election draws near, there are going to be a greater number of public events that are part of both the government schedule and the campaign schedule. Opportunities where the candidate is able to make the case that they are working hard in Washington and really sort of help define who they are before any potential opponent does. And there's going to be a greater number of district work periods. The Congress will shut down in August, as it always does. They'll come back for maybe a week or two in September, and then they try very hard not to go too far into October, because typically what happens is it hurts incumbents. And since the incumbents control the calendar, they want to get people back in the district so they can remain on the good side. And they have a greater desire to meet with new people and get to know new businesses and new industries. And so there are more opportunities, in particular if you're, if you have friends who have strong connections with the candidate, there will be more opportunities to sort of get to know who's running and get to know, let them get to know what you're about. And then, of course, fundraisers. There are always going to be fundraisers on the campaign schedule, one way or another. So pre-election opportunities include volunteering, fundraising, making contributions, advertising, and what I mean by that is putting up yard signs, or writing letters to the editor, or talking about reasons publicly of why you would support a candidate. I caution some of that. Not everybody loves every candidate, but it is something that candidates take a very strong and positive notice of, putting yourself out there in public to make a statement like that. And then attending official and campaign events. I mentioned there are a lot more events. This is certainly true. The top two of volunteer and fundraise, there's a school of thought that is very popular in the grassroots community and has some truth behind it, and that is typically a volunteer who shows up to a campaign office is going to be valued more than somebody who just writes a check. And the reason why is because that person is a face, whereas the check may literally just be a check from somebody they don't know. And typically volunteers who bring more volunteers with them are going to be valued even more. Again, the level of people available is diminishing, and the fact that people are giving their time to help somebody run for office has a lot of value. On the other hand, people who raise money, so they make a contribution and they bring in additional contributions, are also equally valued. So sort of, as you're looking at building a long-term relationship with a member of the Congress, getting to know, their campaign by being a part of it is certainly going to have some value. You will be somebody known by the campaign staff. You will have opportunities to interact directly with the candidate, who is typically all over their campaign, and really gives you an opportunity to help provide service to the person who's in office without necessarily asking for something in return. So, just keep that in mind. And then finally, after the election, setting up a meeting. It's important to set up a meeting. Let them know, hey, congratulations, I'm glad you've won. I hope you'll be able to meet with me at some time. Want to talk to you about my business. Want to talk to you about some of the things that we're concerned about in the coming Congress. Things that are really just sort of, basic, but a lot of people don't do that. Typically, the Congress will get elected, they'll have their meeting, they'll go back to Washington for a couple of weeks, get their business done there, and then they start all over again with the new congressional cycle. But everything. A lot of people have only been waiting to do their first meetings in January. So think about doing your first meetings of the year after the election in November and December. Send a congratulatory letter. It's also an opportunity to get your issues out there, but also to share what your business is, what it means to the district, and it provides an opportunity to introduce and reintroduce the organization, the business, and the issues. So, and something's happening to my computer here. Give me a second. Some final thoughts here, and I wrote this one out because it was an article I saw. Hold on one second here. Something is going on. Excuse me one second while I try to fix this. Okay, well, there we are. So campaigns are going to be spending a lot of money on technical solutions and using the internet and mobile devices and social media as ways to reach their voters. And part of this is because they need to reach a lot more voters, but they also aren't getting as many interpersonal relationships and connections that they might be getting through, sending out targeted emails and making sure that they're, targeting various aspects of their constituencies and their messages. I would say, well, that's a reality. The truth is this. People are going to matter more. And the pictures I have on here is from one is a campaign office. The other is a restaurant in North Dakota where I worked on a campaign. We're in North Dakota with about 2.5 weeks before the election. It was in early October or so. I'm sitting in the campaign office, and in walks 6 nurses. And the 6 nurses say, "We're here to make phone calls." And we said, "Awesome, great." And we're all the people on the campaign staff are all looking around. We're all asking each other, sending emails. No one knew that they were coming, but we had work for them to do, and they were ready to do it. They were in the office for about 2 hours making phone calls, and afterwards, campaign manager said, "Oh, why don't we go to Peacock Alley and get a drink?" Because the day was sort of winding down. And they said, "Great, we'll come." And so all 6 nurses show up at the bar, and we're sitting there, and the campaign manager told me what was going to happen next, but the congressman we were working for at the time suddenly called the campaign manager's cell phone and said, "I want to talk to all 6 of those nurses." So the cell phone went from each nurse to each nurse, and each nurse talked about, thanked him for the service he did for them on a particular bill, talked about issues that they're seeing coming up in the next Congress, and talked about sort of, ways that they can, continue to support him. He listened to every single one of them. He sent them all personal letters. He knew that election that he had 6 nurses show up at a time of need. And that's very telling because you could be trying to schedule meetings or sit down with your member of Congress over a course of 1 month, but having the opportunity to get a direct connection like that at the end of the day was a really strong message in my mind of why campaign volunteers really do matter. So I sort of flash that forward to 2016 now. It was the personal connection, the fact that these people came and on their own took time to made the effort is what really mattered in the long run. They could have sent an email and said, "Oh, we just sent some emails to some of our friends. We're really supportive of it." And that's something we would have been grateful for, but the fact that they personally showed up really helped extend that message. So that's sort of what I have here. And David, I cannot see the question box this time. But have we gotten any questions I can try to answer?
Yes, we do have a question. I'm actually going to start off with a question of my own that actually just came to me while we were talking. But now since people are going to be tuning in probably this year more than previous years, having gone through being in the program and being more aware of this type of stuff, as they're getting pitched about these events, learning about them, how can they tell? How do they know what is a campaign event, versus like a town hall or kind of a typical constituent event? And depending on the type of event, specifically kind of how should they conduct themselves at those various types of things? You know what I mean? If it's the type of thing where, where it's they're not going to volunteer at the campaign office, which is clearly them going to the campaign, but it's just kind of attending out of interest, how would you conduct yourselves in those 2 different environments?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think in both aspects, you're somebody who's representing your business and as well as the organization. In ways of telling it's different, it really has to do with 2 ways, and there's sort of the obvious way, which is you see on the invitation it's sponsored by the candidate. You see that the email you received came from a non-U.S. government email account, so it's the House Representatives. If it's a government account, that's the email is @mail.house.gov or has a .gov extension on it. The other way is sort of looking at sort of how the goal of the function. If the goal of the function explicitly says talking about Washington or talking about the legislative, things that happen in Washington, that's something that's going to be more of an official event. If the goal event is to support the candidate, is typically the words that are used, obviously that would be a very different type of event. When I was working on a campaign, we had about 6 weeks before the election, the congressman I worked for had sponsored with MetLife or some other financial services company at the time a retirement panel talking about retirement security. And it was done in a government office building. It was very much focused entirely on sort of retirement issues, Social Security, alternatives to Social Security, ways that you can set up IRAs. It was very much focused on a constituent service where there was no talk about running for office. There was no talk about the campaign or the candidate. And that was a very different event. Now, I would say if you are someone who is not inclined to support the candidate, but just the basis of your district is they're always going to elect a candidate like the one you have. I think it's okay to not necessarily attend campaign functions. You can still have a relationship as a member of industry, if you will. So, in sort of the how to behave and whatnot, I think, even if you don't support the candidate, I would sort of avoid the campaign event, and then that way you don't have to worry about being disrespectful, because they'll also recognize when, as much as they'll recognize when you are doing good, they'll also recognize when you're not doing as good. So.
Sure. That's good advice. And the question we do have here, and we'll finish off with this, is it's because it sounds like legislators are so busy with campaign work. Would you say it's harder to set up meetings with them that are more policy focused, so kind of those traditional constituent meetings, and as opposed to campaign or money related events? So I'll just add to that. Are there specific types of meetings like facility tours that legislators simply won't do kind of close to the election because it's too much of a time suck, not worth their time, or their schedules book up much earlier because of the busy campaign season?
Obviously, as things get closer to the election in November, the candidate's time is going to be filled up with campaign events, whether it's attending a get out the vote rally in a community or walking a precinct. So in that respect, yes. However, it doesn't mean that more policy-focused events can't happen. And typically, sort of what I would say the main selling point of the policy-related event is, making sure that that event helps bring in additional constituents. So if it's a one-on-one coffee and you want to talk about policy, chances are that's going to be pushed to after the election. If it's a facility tour and you have 100 people who live in the district who work in that facility, even though you're going to talk about policy, chances are they're going to want to see 100 people who could potentially vote for them. So.
Sure. Definitely makes sense, for sure. And I think that would apply probably starting in August and going up into the election, is they're thinking more in terms of the campaign, so it's better to have these kind of bigger, events, as you say, right?
Correct. I would also mention that with the primary election, there's similar opportunities, especially if it's, meeting new constituents. That would also sort of reflect positives, if you will.
Yep, and to that point, the primaries obviously happen months before the general election, and all the different states have different primary dates. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me, and I can give you that information regarding specific primary campaign deadlines if there is a heated primary in your district. But with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Hopefully, you now have kind of a good understanding of how this year will kind of shake out in terms of the election and opportunities available to you to get involved. A lot of talk today. I wanted to make it different than past calls, and a lot of talk was about kind of the campaign work and opportunities there. Obviously, getting involved with the campaign is kind of a personal decision, or a business decision that you have to make on your company. Now, we're obviously not going to require that from you because, like I said, that's kind of your decision. But if you do support your member of Congress, your senator, whatever it is, and you do want to kind of take your connection up with them, take it up a couple notches, there's going to be a lot of great opportunities this year to really do that and really kind of dive in, whether it's volunteering your time, money, whatever it is. So we're happy to kind of walk you through that when that time comes, and I'll be filling people in throughout the year on opportunities regarding that. So for our next webinar, I haven't really identified a date or specific topic yet, but like I said, I think we're going to have kind of this ongoing discussion about the election season and then kind of get your involvement that way. You'll see this final slide that I asked Adam to add last minute, which is just a kind of a quick promo for our first ever Yang Legislative Conference happening this June. We're expecting somewhere between 25 to 35 Yang members. For those who don't know, Yang is our young person under 40 group. They'll be coming to DC and participating in meetings with their legislators. I think there's a couple of Yang members in the who are advocacy leaders also, but who I've talked to about this. But if you have any young people who are under 40 in your company who you think might be interested in this type of event, definitely send them the link at the bottom. Send them my way. I'm happy to answer any questions. I think it's going to be a great event. And I want to do more of these DC fly-ins in the future. I think our last association-wide fly-in was in 2012, and but we need to convince. We need these to be well attended and well run, and to convince our leadership that these are kind of worth the time and money that we invest into making them successful. And the initial response has been pretty solid without doing too much promotion early on. So I do have high hopes for this. And last thing I'll say is, I think I mentioned this end of last year in one of my emails, but I'm also working on an advocacy leader LinkedIn group that can be another platform for me to share updates with the group, and for you all to post comments, maybe photos from your meetings, your volunteer work that you're doing this year, or whatever. So please be on the lookout for more information on that. I'll probably be, I think I'm connected with some of you on LinkedIn, but I'll probably be connecting with, looking for the most of you in the coming days. So I know everybody loves the digital networking. And that's all I've got on my end. So thank you, Adam, again for your time, and thank you for everyone for tuning in. And I will talk to you all again soon. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.